All right, let's go to Richard Haass. He is the president emeritus in the Council on Foreign Relations, also the author of the weekly Substack newsletter, Home and Away. Richard, really good to have you. All
Thanks,
right, we've seen a little bit of pushback from EU leaders today. What's your sense of where they're standing and what they are going to be willing to do?
Look, my guess is they'd be willing to meet us more than halfway on agreeing to a more intimate security and economic relationship with Greenland. They're open to that. We used to have much more of a military presence there. They'd be open to it. The area is opening up because of climate change, ironically enough, something the administration denies, but there you have it. I think a really interesting question is to what extent Europeans physically, militarily reinforce the area, and then whether the United States would blink rather than initiate some type of a confrontation. But I still think if there's an IQ in the room, this can be worked out peacefully.
Well, how so?
Well, again, the issue is not the substance. The Europeans, Greenland, Denmark are all willing to give us a lot of what we want in terms of military access and economic cooperation there to develop rare earths or anything else. What they're not going to give us is the symbolism of quote unquote ownership, which, by the way, is something we don't need. Katie, I hope you're sitting down, but the last I checked, we defended Europe without owning Europe throughout the Cold War. We've kept China off of Taiwan, and the last I checked, we don't own Taiwan. So the idea that you have to own something to deter or defend is preposterous without any historical basis. So again, this is a crisis. This is a crisis we are creating, and just as easily we can diffuse it.
Yeah, when you say IQ in the room, whose IQ? Are you relying on the president's IQ here? Is it one of his advisors' IQ, Marco Rubio? Is it Emmanuel Macron? Who?
It's mainly on our side. We're the ones who have generated this crisis. It wasn't as though the Europeans announced that Greenland was off limits. It's not as though they acted irresponsibly. And indeed, what the Europeans ought to do, if they were smart, is they would come forward with a public document, almost like they did with Ukraine, you'll remember, a couple of weeks ago, and say, here's what we're willing to sign on to. And that would make it more difficult for the president to stand at a lectern and say, we've got to have more. If they're willing to offer us a lot, and I believe they are, I think they should make a formal offer with Denmark and Greenland at their names at the top and put it out there publicly, which again makes it more difficult for the White House to argue it has any reason to escalate this into even worse of a crisis.
I wonder at what point just giving the president an off-ramp is going to be worth it for the Europeans, because he keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. Emmanuel Macron vaguely compared him to Vladimir Putin. Governor Gavin Newsom's in Davos today saying if you don't stand up to this guy, he's never going to stop. What do you make of that argument, that not standing up to him now is just going to lead to more headaches, more complication, and potentially an unrepairable break with our alliances?
Well, we may already be there to some extent. My guess is a lot of the damage is already baked into the cake. I don't know too many Europeans, Katie, who think that Article 5, which is the bedrock of the NATO treaty, is to be counted on anymore. I think this administration and how it's acted on Ukraine and now here has raised existential doubts about our willingness to be there for our European allies. So I think the alliance is to some extent a fundamentally different entity than it ever was. That damage is done. But again, if the Europeans come forward with a very forthcoming strategic economic offer, and at the same time maybe reinforce Greenland, that would force the United States to initiate hostilities. I find it hard to believe even this president would do that. So the Europeans may call our bluff, and that might not be a crazy thing to do.
If there is a new president down the line,
one day there will.
Does this stuff get repaired? I mean, can you foresee a Republican president or even a Trump acolyte acting in the same way that Trump does and disregarding and devaluing the alliances that have kept us both safe and rich for 80 years?
Well, on the Republican side, there's different schools. If you think about J.D. Vance, who just about a year ago went over to Europe and launched the culture war against Europe at the Munich Security Conference, You look at the national security strategy that was released a month or two ago. There is clearly a powerful anti-European school of thought or tendency in this administration. And if Vance or someone like him were to become president, then you're sure the anti-European dynamic could continue. But I think if you had most other Republicans, it would not. I think if you had almost any Democrat, it would not. But that said, I'm not sure you can go back to where things were. A little bit of Humpty Dumpty here. I don't think we can put it back together again. So maybe we could reach some new relationships, some new understandings. But I don't think you will ever again have a situation where Europeans will put so much of their own security in American hands. They just don't trust us. They don't see us the same way.
All right, Richard Haass, thank you so much.